I started with real estate too. I actually jumped into real estate prior to really, figuring out what business was I going to be in. So I agree that the order you do things in doesn't much matter so much as you come to the same conclusion about there's only 24 hours in a day and you got to find a way to build income and build wealth.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash that like button and click subscribe. For those of you listening on a podcast platform, be sure to subscribe on whatever platform that is and leave us a rating if you can. The more likes, ratings, and subscriptions that we get, the more we can spread the message and grow our community. So we also have a free Facebook group. It's called the Average Joe Finances Network. Check us out, join the group, join the community, ask questions, and become a part of the team. All of our other social media accounts are listed in our flow page, and we have them in the video or podcast description below. Hey, how's it going, everybody? So today's guest is Adam Doran, and he's a former police officer turned wealth advisor in Kansas City. He specializes in creative strategies for real estate investors and business owners to build tax-free wealth while they grow their business. In addition to his work as a wealth advisor, Adam has been investing in real estate since 2011. He started with wholesaling and single-family rentals, then transitioned in 2019 to commercial properties, and now owns 52 units with his partners in Kansas City. So Adam, awesome background. Really love what you're doing in real estate and as a wealth advisor. I'm really excited to talk to you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mike, for the invite to be on today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to start this off the same way I start every show. And I gave like a wave top of who you are, what you're doing, where'd you come from. So if you could just elaborate a little bit more into that, share a little bit more about yourself and your story. Like how did this all get started for you?
Yeah. Before I was being a wealth advisor and before I first got into real estate, I was a police officer and I did that for 16 years. I got into it right at age 21, right when I was eligible to be a cop. It was something I knew I wanted to do from the time I was really young. And I did really enjoy that career. The first 10 years of it, I couldn't believe I got paid to do it. I really did enjoy going to work every day. However, over those first 10 years of doing that career, things in my life shifted. I got older, I got married, had a kid, priorities shifted, and I got tired of living check to check. So 10 years into this career, I'm trying to figure out how I can improve my financial situation and went on a journey of starting to educate myself about finances and how real wealth works and how to build sustainable wealth. Probably a similar journey to what listeners on the podcast here are going through or have just started. And basically through seminars that I went to and meetings that I attended, I came to the conclusion that there were a couple key pieces. One was that I was going to have to learn about business and start a business, because by doing that, that would qualify me for 400 plus tax breaks that you don't get if you don't own a business. The other thing was that I realized wealthy people, successful people often owned real estate, and that real estate helped them to not only enjoy income from their business, but they could take the excess and put it into real estate for additional income, because we all only have 24 hours a day and we can all only work so many hours. And then the other thing was I realized that wealthy people understood finances and the financial markets. And so that was the three principles. I was like, okay, got to learn about business, real estate, and financial markets. And going through that journey led me to, after about another 6 years of being a police officer, decided I wanted to change careers. I wanted to be able to spend all of my time in that realm of finances. I found the journey fascinating. And here's what else I found. Traditional financial advice and traditional financial advisors, by and large, what they were encouraging did not align with what I had learned about how real wealth works. And that was a huge piece to me that was like, I need to get into this industry and share the things that I've been learning. And so that's what brought me into it.
It's a very similar story that for people that get into a career field and maybe about halfway through, or they're doing it for a couple of years and then they realize, hey, how am I going to build my wealth a little bit faster? Or what's the best way to do this? to where I don't have to go to work every day and I could spend more time with my family. So it looks like one of those key drivers for you was getting some of that time back. You wanted some of that time freedom. Speaking of time, I had to write this down when you said it. And you had mentioned we all have 24 hours in a day and we can only work for those 24 hours. And first of all, you don't want to work 24 hours in a day because that's pretty awful, because then the next day starts and you've been nonstop working and you haven't slept and have no energy. And then how can you actually perform the next day? Yes, that's a very key thing. Like, we all have the same amount of time. And it's a matter of what do you do with that time to better your situation? And it looks like you figured it out. Yeah, at least what worked for you was starting a business and then getting into real estate. And that's one of the things that I find that a lot of people that come on the show, it doesn't matter what route they decide to go. Some people don't build a business first. Some people decide they want to invest in the stock market, or even to get into other things, like there's alternatives like crypto now that people are doing. And then a lot of times after they start building up some wealth, they don't know where to put it. So they put it into real estate, which is a great place to store your wealth, so that it's not just sitting in a savings account and collecting like no interest whatsoever. So that's really awesome. I always like bringing it back to real estate because it's one of my favorite wealth building assets out there, because it's just that good and it's just that steady, because we all need a place to live. Okay. Now, you were on the police force for 11 years, you said?
16 years total.
16.
Okay, it was about the total 10, 11 year mark that I really started exploring how to build wealth and actually got involved in real estate. And interesting, you brought that up too, the order in which you do things. Everybody starts out in a different place. It seems like I started with real estate too. I actually jumped into real estate prior to really, figuring out what business was I going to be in. So I agree that the order you do things in doesn't much matter so much as you come to the same conclusion about there's only 24 hours in a day and you got to find a way to build income and build wealth. Okay. So it was about 16 years in. So it was around the 10, 11 year mark when you started to build your own business, get into real estate, right? So over that next 5 to 6 year period, you were able to get yourself to a point where you can actually step away from your 9 to 5. So step away from the police force and go into what you're doing right now as a wealth advisor for your own business and real estate full time. 5 to 6 years, that might sound like a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not a long time at all, especially to be able to walk away from a job that's paying you your full-time income. That's what you've been used to living off. And that's how you took care of yourself, your family, your own home. That's what paid the bills, right? Yeah. And here you are 5 years later, able to walk away from that because of what you've built on the side. And I think a lot of people, especially in full-time career fields, and I know I've run into this a couple of times myself, telling myself, like, how's this going to work? How am I going to find the time to do this? If you start a side gig or a side hustle now and you start building on that, or you start investing right now, you'd be very surprised where you can be 5 years from now. And that's why I feel like that whole thing about what you did and over that 5 to 6 year period is just absolutely amazing. And I think more people need to know, hey, you can do this. You can start something on the side and then replace your 9 to 5 job. Okay, so now fast forward to where we are today. How long have you been investing in real estate? 10 years.
Okay, so 10 years now. Okay, fantastic. And 5 of those years has been without working at your original 9 to 5 job. So that's really awesome, man. Okay, so I want to tie it into what you do now as a wealth advisor, right? So one of the topics that we're going to talk about is traditional financial planning and how that's broken. So can you tell me, like, how is traditional financial planning broken today?
So what I believe is that traditional financial planning is broken for a couple of reasons. Number one, primarily, it takes control away from if you go into a traditional financial planning meeting, the advisor there is positioned as the expert. They usually have, it almost sounds like an entire separate language they speak. And there's this 3 meeting sequence of you meet, you get acquainted, then they collect your financial data and you meet and you go over that. And then there's a meeting where they give this presentation about here's what you're going to do based on where you are. And it positions them as the expert. And then you're then turning over your assets for them to manage for a fee. And you're not controlling that process. And furthermore, when that money gets invested, when they manage those assets, chances are the advisor themselves isn't managing them. It's going to some third party out on the East Coast or something when it's going into Wall Street funds. There's no control. There's also no, because usually you're encouraged to stuff your money away into these accounts where you're penalized if you grab the money before you're 59 and a half. All your traditional retirement accounts, pre-59 and a half, early withdrawal penalties. And then furthermore, and this is a significant one that I like to emphasize, because I think it's right now today, we're seeing it in the headlines. Tax rates, I think, are far more likely to be higher in the future than they are to be lower. And when you think about where we are by default accumulating all of our assets, if you're doing it the traditional way, so if you have an employer-sponsored retirement program, or if you go to an advisor, more than likely you're in a 401k, an IRA, some sort of tax-deferred savings account. And that seems really good today, because if you make 100 grand, you put 10 grand in that account, you're now only paying taxes on 90,000. But you've deferred the taxes and you've deferred the tax calculation until some point in the future. And that account's getting bigger. So that problem is getting bigger. If you believe, like I do, that tax rates are going up in the future, and you've accumulated, let's say by the time you're retirement age, you've accumulated $1 million, $2 million, $5 million in that account. The question is, how much is really yours? And you don't know the answer. And the reason we don't know the answer is because how much is yours is going to be determined by what is the tax rate when you take that money out. Oh, and by the way, you and I don't control that tax rate. So it goes back to what I said about control. That's what's broken about traditional financial planning. And so what I want to do is work with clients to help them make educated decisions about where they're allocating money and where they're building assets to insulate themselves from future tax rate hikes, because I think they're coming and we're already seeing them now. Giving yourself liquidity so that if a real estate deal comes along or any kind of opportunity comes along, starting a business, buying a business, that you have liquidity and you can access your money and not get penalized on it and be able to execute on that opportunity. And then furthermore, just being able to plan for your future with a level of confidence, because if tax rates go up by 20%, that doesn't negatively impact my future, something along those lines. So that's really what it's all about, is giving control back to the clients that I work for by helping them position themselves. And that's all this is this is just positioning yourself more favorably from a tax rate perspective, from a liquidity and control perspective. It's all about positioning.
Okay. I took notes again when you were speaking. And the big thing you're talking about here is how going the traditional route for financial planning and just setting up your retirement for the future, that traditional route, you said, takes control away from the client. It was in more than one way, right? Because it was pretty much the financial advisor is the one saying, okay, we've got your financial information. This is how we're going to do it to get you to where you want for your goals. So you give them your goals, and then they'll help you get into the right vehicles that they believe is the right vehicles for you to get to where you are to meet your goals. Now, the thing is, if you have certain goals that you want to be at a certain age, you don't, like you said, you don't know what that tax bracket's going to be when you hit that age. You don't know what the tax rate's going to be. And it could be almost detrimental, because you would think that you're going to have a certain number because you're going off of what today's tax rate would be. And it could be way higher in the future. And when you go to pull out your retirement, when you hit 59 and a half, or the traditional age of 65 is what a lot of people like to retire at, that's not good, because you're not going to be probably where you thought you were going to be. And like you said, that control has been taken from you. So now I know another topic that we were going to discuss about today, and I don't know if this is what you were hitting on with that first question that I just asked you, but we wanted to talk about the tax problem that nobody's really talking about.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. And I did just touch on a little bit. I think the first thing is the tax problem nobody's talking about is when we look at taxes historically, and this will be a good one for anyone who's listening. This is just a good quick history lesson. So if you would just ask anyone, pull them on the street and say, how do you feel about taxes? Everybody always complains that they're high. But if you actually do the research, historically speaking, the highest marginal tax bracket we had, like income tax bracket we've ever had in America, was in 1944 and 1945. The highest marginal tax bracket was 94%. I was stunned when I learned that. And I only learned that a few years back. And as I share that with people, they're always shocked by that, because our current highest tax bracket right now is 37%. That's a big difference. And if you actually look historically through the 1970s, the highest marginal tax brackets were up in the 70% range. So historically speaking, we're at historic lows for income taxes. Now, when you look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the fact that it's expiring here in a couple of years, And the current administration, and this isn't a political statement, this is just a fact, the current administration has said that they intend to raise tax rates. We're at 37%. We've been at 94. There's a lot of spread in there. So there's a lot of opportunity for that to go up. But that being said, it hasn't changed the way financial planning is getting done. We still have clients telling people, max out 401ks, max out your IRA. I don't know. If tax rates are going up, is that really the best play? Is there a tax-free asset where I could build money instead? So that's the first piece. The second piece is we're already starting to see tax rate hikes that aren't really announced. They're quiet. I don't know if you're familiar with the Secure Act. The Secure Act was passed back in December of, I think it was December of 19. It's either December 19 or December of 20. Very recently, the Secure Act was passed. That eliminated something called the stretch IRA. It used to be if you were a non-spouse inheritant of an IRA. So your dad passes away and leaves you his IRA, and it's got $1 million in it. It used to be, as the child of that person, you could then take and you could spread out the required minimum distributions on that IRA over your life expectancy. So it wasn't that big a deal. If you inherited dad or mom's $1 million IRA, you could spread those minimum distributions out and it didn't really bump you up into the next tax bracket. When the Secure Act passed, that changed everything. You're now required, if you inherit that same account, you're now required to liquidate the whole account, draw all the money out, and pay all the taxes within 10 years. Most people, when they inherit something like that from their parents, are in their 50s, probably in your peak earning years. You're probably making the most money you've ever made in your life. So imagine you're making $200,000 a year and you inherit $1 million IRA, and now you've got to liquidate that money in the next 10 years. So if you do it evenly, that's an extra $100,000 a year. You just bumped yourself up a couple tax brackets on money you really don't need. So that was a tax rate hike. And not a lot of people know about it because it wasn't like announced as a big deal. Versus if the government came out and said, hey, we're going to raise taxes 20%, you better believe people will be talking about that. Not a lot of conversations going on around the Secure Act. So that's just one example of how there's this tax problem and it's not getting enough attention. And you can test me on this. Anybody who's listening, Google on the Wall Street Journal or USA Today or Money Magazine, whichever, Kiplinger's, whichever one you want to use, you don't see a lot of conversation about building tax-free wealth. You still see all the conversations focusing on tax-deferred accounts. And I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, that's a huge point, especially when you have these. I'm going to bring it to a Star Wars reference here because I'm a big Star Wars fan. You have this Phantom Menace, right? So you have these small things that are happening in the background, and people might not look at the Secure Act and think anything of it. They're like, oh, okay, just have to withdraw this over the next 10 years. But like you said, if you think about it, if that's $1 million in there and you're pulling it out, and that's an extra $100,000 a year now of taxable income.
Yes.
That counts for you as the individual who is withdrawing that. Yeah, that can potentially bump you up quite a few tax brackets to where now you're in that tax bracket paying that 37%, where before you were probably paying 22%, right? That extra 15% can be huge. It can eat up quite a bit of that 100,000 extra that you are pulling out and can really affect what your plans were with that income. That is definitely something that people should be mindful about. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because, like you said, if you go and Google about tax deferred accounts right now and everything else, that's what you're going to see is articles about, hey, now's the time to start increasing your contributions. You need to think about what the future is going to be like for yourself. Make sure that you have a really good nest egg to sit on for when you're in your 60s, because you don't know where the world's going to be. Hey, another great argument to that is you don't know where the world's going to be when you hit your 60s. And by putting all of your money into a tax deferred account, you can really pay for that in the future, literally and figuratively. So paying the taxes, but also paying the price because now you're not prepared to be fully retired as you expected to be. There's always unexpected expenses, especially as we get older. You're going to start seeing more medical expenses and things like that. And that's all stuff that should be factored in. And you don't really see people talk about that too much. You just talk about, okay, what is the ideal income I need to make monthly to live off of when I'm in my 60s to not have to go to work? What are my expenses? And that's what people always focus on. And if you don't think about some of the other things that can come up with it, as in raised taxes, medical expenses, and things like that, you could really be setting yourself up for future failure. And you'll get to the point where you're living and you have no retirement cash left. Because even with all the craziness that's going on right now with the pandemic and all this other stuff and different diseases and everything, our life expectancy is still much higher than it was even 20 years ago. And it's continuing to go up. We're fluctuating right now. It's going down and up a little bit, but generally over time, just like the stock market, it always goes up, right? Our life expectancy is always going up. And right now, I think life expectancy is on average 77. And realistically, when you think about it, if the ideal retirement age is 65, you want to have enough money to last you 12 years. That doesn't seem like a long time. And it's not. And when you think about that too, do you really want to wait till 65 to retire and just have 12 years where you're not going to work every day and having to be able to enjoy your life? And especially at that age too, like we said before, with medical expenses and things like that, how are you supposed to take those trips and vacations and be retired and go take that trip to Europe and stuff and go do what you want to do when you have a bad back or you have a bum knee or you can't walk because of whatever? So there's so many different things that you have to factor in there. Is that really the right age for you as well? So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. Speaking of being able to retire a little bit earlier, so I think one of the themes of this podcast as well, and one of the things that you talked about that you've done yourself, is how you worked yourself out of a job, right? You worked yourself out of the police force. And you did that through investing, growing a business, and building a real estate portfolio. Sure, you can call what you're doing right now still a job, being a wealth advisor and everything. But at the same time, this is something you built yourself. This is something that you're doing and you enjoy. And when you're doing something that you really love doing, I always like to say this too, can you really call that work? Because it's something you just truly enjoy. And you've got yourself set up in a pretty good spot to where you're getting yourself financially free and well before your 60s. And you get that time freedom back. You get that time back with your family and everything. And a lot of people focus on this word called FIRE, right? Financial independence, retire early. I like that, but I like the first two letters. I don't like the last two letters really, because I'm actually even wearing a t-shirt under here that says it has the FIRE acronym on it. I have a coat on right now because it's actually very cold in Hawaii right now. So for people listening, why is he wearing a light jacket? That's why we don't have heat in our houses. Okay. Because it doesn't ever get this cold. But anyway, so FIRE with that financial independence part, that's the part I like. And that's what you've built for yourself, right? Is that financial independence. I think that's where more people need to be focused, not so much on the R word, not so much on that retire word. You want to focus on the financial independence so you can get that time back and get that time freedom. So anyway, I can go off on a tangent, which I just did, as you can see. When we talk about wealth advisors, let's bring it back to you, right? There are plenty of them out there. So what makes you different than the typical wealth advisor that somebody would go sit down and talk about their retirement with?
Yeah, I agree with what you said about retirement. I think most of the clients I work for, most of them are business owners, real estate investors. They don't intend to retire in a traditional sense. They're aiming for the same thing you just talked about, which is having control and being financially independent so that work is optional and I get to choose what work I do. And I think that's a better way of, because frankly, we don't want to retire there's a lot of research out there about if you cease to be active and contribute, if you're no longer a contributor, you die a lot earlier. So we still want to contribute and we still want to do productive things. I think most of us value some type of work. It's just we want a choice over it. And we don't want to have to get up at a certain time every day, be at a certain place at a certain time and punch a time clock. So to be able to escape that, the rat race, as it always gets called, and have independence and freedom, I think is where it's at. So now I'll get to answering your question. Sorry for the long-winded. What makes me different and what makes our process different at Prevail, which is the firm I'm at, Prevail Strategies in Kansas City. It feels totally different. The client experience feels totally different. We focus on the client experience. So it's not a matter, there's this 3-meeting sequence and we're going to be the professional and we're going to prescribe a plan. It's more of we lead with education. Like a lot of the information I've shared today about the tax problem nobody's talking about, how do we get back control, building tax-free assets. We lead with education. And it is more a consultative process where the client says, okay, this resonates with me. Let's focus on this. And then we're going to work through that. So for example, a lot of the client conversations I'm in start with the tax problem. Holy crap, I just realized I've built up a whole bunch in these tax deferred accounts. And I want more control. I want more liquidity. I want insulation from taxes. I want to be able to take my money and leverage it into real estate and build a portfolio. Okay, then we'll run with that and we will collaboratively look at different strategies and put together a plan based off implementing different strategies that support what you're already planning to do. We're just going to help you do it better by putting the right strategies in place. So I'll give you an example, and I'll share just an overview of one key strategy that we often do for business owners and real estate investors to help resolve the tax issue by getting more into a tax-free bucket. They also resolve the liquidity issue by allowing us to have an account we're building that we have access to money and we don't have to worry about pre-59.5 penalties. And we don't have to worry about any of the contribution or income limits that come with IRAs and 401ks. Because, you can only put so much in those, and you can only qualify for Roths if you make below a certain income level. So we can get around all of those limitations just by using a vehicle that is more conducive to having control, having liquidity. Yeah, I can use it for retirement income, but I can also tap that bucket of money today if I want to get into a real estate deal or buy a business or build my business. So one of the strategies we use is actually using whole life insurance as an asset class. So instead of it just being an expense on your income statement and being an insurance policy where you're buying this death benefit that you'll never use, somebody will, but it's not for you, actually turning and building it as a tax-free asset that, yeah, it has a death benefit because it's an insurance policy, but primary is the fact that there's a cash account that I'm building and it's liquid and it's not correlated to the markets. There's no downside risk. And it has guaranteed minimum accumulation. And then there's usually a kicker in the form of a dividend every year. And that strategy goes by a lot of different names: creative capital strategy, lifestyle banking, infinite banking, cash flow banking. People have given it all sorts of names from a marketing standpoint. But the reality is all we're doing is we're viewing insurance differently. We're building an asset with it. And the reason that insurance is the particular vehicle we use is because in the Internal Revenue Code, there's actually a section devoted to life insurance, Section 7702, and it basically affords whole life insurance all the same benefits that a Roth IRA gets, but without any limitations. Now, that's an oversimplified way of putting it, but to avoid getting in the weeds and just overview, because again, this is just one strategy. We do a lot of strategies, but this is one, and it's a foundational one. The reason that we do that is because not only can we build an account tax-free, but we can enjoy continued compounding growth of that capital account, even when we deploy cash and use it in a real estate deal, use it to build a business or buy a business or whatever. What I mean by that is, imagine if you could go to your local bank and they offered you a savings account that was tax-free. Once you put the money in, you don't pay taxes on it. And what if they would pay you a competitive interest rate? Let's just say 4%, because that would be a pretty competitive interest rate for a savings account right now. And let's say that if you took and you used money from that account, like there's $100,000 in there, and you take the $100,000 out and you go use it on a real estate deal for the next 5 years. What if they would keep crediting you all the interest as though the money's still in the account? And then after and let's say you get, 15% a year on your real estate deal. So you're making 15% a year on your real estate deal and then 4% a year over here on your capital account, and you're making money in two places at the same time. Then when you close out the real estate deal, either with a refi or a sale of the property, you take and you replenish your savings account. With your policy, it's like you never took and used that money. So that account continued to grow and compound. There was no missed interest or dividends there. So from a growth standpoint, it makes a lot of sense as a capital strategy. Couple other things, and then I'll let you respond because you might have a couple follow-ups. I see you grinning like you got a couple follow-ups. But a couple other things about that account is in most states in the US, that life insurance policy will get similar asset protection treatment that a retirement account would get. So if a creditor sues you and wins a lawsuit or a judgment against you, they might be able to tap your savings account, your checking account, your business accounts, but they can't touch your life insurance policy. So that's very valuable. The other thing is when we get to retirement, and again, we've defined what that means, different things to different people, but let's just say from age 70 to age 90, you want to have a tax-free income stream in addition to your other buckets of money. Maybe you're getting cash from your real estate, you're getting cash from an IRA that you had or a 401k at a job you had, but this is another bucket you can use and it's tax-free and you don't have to report the income to the IRS. What we have found, Mike, by modeling out different financial scenarios for clients, we can take, and maybe that client could have safely, with a traditional portfolio, could have safely taken out 3 to 4% of their account balance every year. When we add the life insurance as a tax-free, non-reportable asset, we can actually juice that to 7%, 8% they can take out of their portfolio a year. So you can actually accumulate less money and still have more income later on. So those are the value points of it. We find business owners and real estate investors love it because we can still accomplish some of the long-term objectives of building for the future, but we've got access to money in the meanwhile. And I can't tell you how many folks I've talked to that said, I'd love to get started in real estate, but I don't have any money to do it. And I'm like, well, how much you got in your 401k? And they're like, 200 grand. I'm like, well, if you could access that money, you could do it. So just having a place where you can keep money and have access to it, big deal.
As soon as you started talking about it, I started grinning and I started writing stuff down, because the first thing I wrote down when you started talking about whole life insurance, I wrote that down using whole life insurance as an asset class. And then right under that, I wrote double tap. And what I mean by double tap, and that's exactly what you went into, right? How you can have the money in this policy and then borrow from it, and it's still collecting the original interest on it as if you never touched that money. And then you could use the money that you borrowed from it to put a down payment on a piece of real estate or anything like that. Absolutely fantastic strategy. I've had other people on the show that have talked about that before. It's absolutely awesome. And that is definitely something that makes you different than a traditional financial advisor, especially when you're going to talk to more of probably the people that listen to this show, right? The people that want to invest into their future and get into real estate and different asset classes, different vehicles that are going to get them into a better spot to be financially independent. One of the things that you mentioned too is this is one of the ways that you can take back control. And one of the other things that I was grinning about too is if you see my background here, right, you can see how it says build your wealth, control your future. That's like one of the things that we talk about on the show here is taking back that control to be able to control your time freedom and get your future secured to a spot where you'll have that time. And money is what buys time. You buy your time back. And time is more important than any currency or anything like that, because it's that time. It's the time that we have on this planet, this earth, right? The time that we have with our families. You can't get that back. You can always go out and earn more money, but what are you doing for that? You're trading time. And one of the things that we're talking about here is different ways that you don't have to necessarily trade time. Like you'll trade some time for it, but you get it to a point where it becomes more passive and you have that compound interest starts kicking in and your money starts working for you and not you working for money. And that's one of the things when you can get to that point where you hit the peak, and then once it hits the peaks and it starts coming back down, that's where your money's working for you and you're not working for money. That's really awesome. I definitely appreciate your perspective on that. And I appreciate what you do for investors and how you help them get to that point where they can double tap into this vehicle. Okay, if there was somebody that was going to come to you today and said, hey, they're maybe in their late 20s and been investing in my 401k with my current company, and I want to do something different. I want to be able to work myself out of this 9-to-5 job. Let's say they're in like marketing or something and they're making about $100,000 a year. What would you recommend to them if they're coming to you for the first time and they're saying, hey, I want to get myself to the point where I can retire in the next 15 to 20 years and not be in my late 60s when I want to retire? What would you recommend to somebody that's coming to you with that?
Yeah, I would say there's one of the foundational things is if you're at a job and your employer is paying you for your time, that model, while it used to work long-term for folks, like you could just stay at that job, stay loyal, faithful employee, and that would take care of you over the long term. That model's gone. We live in a different economy. And so I'm not saying that quitting your job is the way to go, but what I would say is in addition to your stable, predictable income from your job, you've got to find a way to build something on the side. And it doesn't have to be a total replacement, but figuring out where your skill set is and deploying that skill set in a marketplace where you control it, where you're the boss, because then you can grow and scale your income above and beyond what your employer truly can afford to pay you. They can only afford to pay you so much per hour. You've got to find something that doesn't limit your income. And if you can do something that's product-based, that's even better because products are easier to scale than services. But that being said, I know that's not everybody's thing. I'm in a service business. But being able just to find ways that you can increase your income. And the other thing is, when you own a business, you can start recouping lost income because you can start taking tax deductions that you don't qualify for if you're just a W-2. So when you start a business, it opens up this whole new world of tax deductions that you're not currently getting if you're only working a job. So number one is looking at starting a business, even if it's just part-time on the side. And that's probably what it should be at the start, is part-time on the side. Number two is that strategy I just mentioned. Start researching, is there a better way or a smarter way for me to save and to build capital? That life insurance strategy is very valuable, not just for real estate investors and business owners, but if you're going to be saving money someplace as a savings account, it offers a lot of advantages versus a traditional savings account where you give the bank your money, they don't pay you any interest, and they go and they leverage it out. Put it somewhere where you can leverage it. And then the third piece would be, once you are expanding your income, once you have started building some capital, you should be looking at other assets that produce income. Because again, real estate's another way to scale your income without working more hours. And in my case, I did it in a reverse order. I got into the real estate first, then I did the life insurance piece as a savings account, and then I started a business. In reality, if I had my druthers, I think I would have started building the savings with the life insurance, started the business, then did the real estate. But either way, whatever order you do it in, the bottom line is those three things right there are core foundational to building long-term wealth. Start a business, start teaching yourself on how to save smarter, start getting educated on and building connections in the real estate world. And that's the other thing I would say on the real estate piece is, so many people are like, I want to do real estate. How do I get started? It's going to be the relationships you build and the connections you make, because more likely than not, you will not have all the necessary resources to just jump out there and do a deal. Unless you've got an extra 30 hours a week that you can, take on a new job. Because I'm going to tell you, having done single family rentals, it becomes a job. So you're going to want to connect with people, have a mentor, build your network, and leverage those people and their skills and their resources. And that's how you're going to get your foot in the door with real estate. It's what's worked incredibly well for me. I'm not in a multifamily deal because I know the multifamily space. I'm in it because I had a lot of friends. And one of my friends happened to be a commercial broker who really knew the business and gave me an opportunity to invest. And that's usually how those types of things come along. Like you, Mike, I'm in love with real estate as an asset class. It is probably my favorite asset class. And I think those two assets we talked about primarily right now on this interview has been the life insurance and the real estate. What's unique about both of those assets is they come with unique tax advantages, and they are not correlated to the stock market. And I'm not saying the stock market is bad. I think a lot of people have built wealth through the stock market. But if you've only got your money in that one place, what happens when we have a 2008? What happens to your wealth? Versus you've got real estate, which is totally non-correlated. So the stock market does this, real estate stays right here. And life insurance is the same way. It's its own unique asset. It's not correlated to either of the two. The more non-correlated assets you can have, the better diversified you are.
I wrote down a bunch of stuff as you were talking about this that just sticks out. There's, like you said, there's three key things: and start a business, build capital, and start buying income producing assets, AKA real estate. And I'm really glad that you had mentioned this, right? You talked about relationship building, right? You want to get into the real estate space. You're not sure how. You build relationships, you network, you meet other people that are doing what you want to do.
That's right.
And so you find a local meetup of people getting together and talking about real estate. There's a lot of virtual ones now too that you can go to just about anywhere. Just look it up. I know, like Facebook events, like if you go onto Facebook events and you type in real estate meetup, there'll be hundreds of meetups that pop up. Join one, go check it out, go meet people, talk to people, network. I talk with real estate investors all over the United States, and I live in Hawaii, and I've invested with a team out here from Hawaii. We bought a 102 unit apartment out in Roanoke, Virginia. And it's all due to connections and networking and getting to know these people and building those relationships. That's absolutely huge. And one of the other things that I love about being in the real estate space is, in general, about 95% of the people that I've met are very giving, and they are very, like, they're giving with their knowledge. They're giving with their opportunities. There's something coming up. They're quick to say, hey, I remember so-and-so talking about this. Let me shoot them an email and see if they're interested in this deal that we have coming up, and things like that. There's so much opportunity in building relationships and in building your network. So that is absolutely huge. So yeah, definitely get involved in something like that. Get involved in a meetup group. Go meet people. Talk about what you're passionate about, and guarantee you there's somebody else out there that wants to have that same conversation with you. It's one of the reasons why I started this podcast too. And one of the, I guess, selfish things for me as a podcaster is I get to build my network by meeting awesome people like you and bringing them on as my guest. And I like to stay connected with all my guests afterwards. You're probably going to be hearing from me months from now. I'll be like, oh man, I'm getting sick of this guy. I love building these relationships. And it's one of the beautiful things about being in this space is the people that you meet. And I've had several people that were not guests on my podcast, just people from meetups that I stay connected with on the regular. And we're always throwing ideas at each other. And if there's a good opportunity that comes up, hey, we can go in on something together. So there's always opportunities that come up, guys and gals. There's always something. It's just a matter of being open to it and having that perspective of building these relationships with everybody and building your network. It's huge. It's huge. Absolutely. I really can't talk about that enough. I have another question I want to ask you, right? Because this is something I just started implementing into the show is because I'm curious for my guests, right? If you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast, if you do, what would that be?
Business and real estate related. Man, that's really hard to narrow it down to just one favorite book or podcast.
I got to put you on the spot. If you could pick one, what would it be?
Yep. There's a book I like, and it's not necessarily specific to business or real estate, but I think it's so important to developing the right mindset to do either of those things. There's a book called Conversations with Millionaires. And the authors' names are Jason Oman and Mike Littman. And it said, and the subtitle on the book is What Millionaires Do to Get Rich That You Never Learned About in School. That was one of the best reads that I think I ever, just as somebody who was trying to change my mindset and change my paradigm, other than the get up, go to work and hang in long term. And it was so helpful to me in building the mindset that it takes to flip your paradigm, take risk, and do things that are outside the norm, like building a business or building a real estate portfolio.
I wrote that one down for sure. I'll check it out. Conversations with Millionaires by Jason Oman and Mike Littman.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Right on. All right. Now, I have to ask you the most important question now. Okay, so I appreciate you answering that, but this is the most important one, especially with the type of conversation we had. This kind of turned into a tax episode and tax advantages of real estate and life insurance, which is absolutely awesome. I really enjoyed all that, and I think it's very informational. People are going to listen to this show and say, hey, I want to know more about Adam and what he's doing and how he learned all this stuff. Or maybe I want to go check him out and use him as a wealth advisor for myself. So where can people find more information about you? Do you have a website you could share with us, social media profiles, anything like that?
Yeah. The absolute best place to find me is on LinkedIn. And I'm not the only Adam Doran on LinkedIn, but I am the only Adam Doran in Kansas City on LinkedIn. And so very easy to find. I'm with Prevail Strategies, so you'll see that in the title line. But that is the best way to connect with me. I'm on there every day. I meet new people on LinkedIn every day. And so that's a great way to contact me. And it's the same as having my phone number because the messages go right to my phone.
We're connected on LinkedIn, so I'll make sure I have a link to your LinkedIn profile in our show notes to make it easy for everybody. Hey, again, Adam, this has been an absolutely awesome conversation. I really genuinely appreciate you taking the time to sit down on a Saturday and have this conversation with me.
Thank you for the invite. I've really enjoyed it, Mike. Enjoyed the chance to share some things, and hopefully everybody that listened found it real useful.
Right on. Aloha from Hawaii. Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.